The first thing the officers noticed about Lydia Voss was that she had not come empty-handed. She arrived at the Rookmere Public Safety Building at 7:18 on a Monday morning in late September, when the fog still hung low over the reservoir and the sidewalks were silver with last night's rain. The lobby smelled of floor polish and weak coffee. A dispatcher was changing the date on the wall calendar. 2 patrol officers were finishing their reports from a string of overnight car break-ins. Then the front doors opened, and Lydia stepped inside with a covered dinner plate balanced in both hands. She was 64, small in the shoulders, always carefully dressed. A woman people in Rookmere knew from recitals, church rummage sales, and the handbell choir that performed every December beneath the old theater marquee. Her gray hair was pinned low at the back of her neck. Her raincoat was buttoned wrong. Under the foil covering the plate were lemon chicken, green beans, and a square of cornbread that had gone cold. "My niece didn't come home," she said. Officer Reeve, who had known Lydia for 20 years and still called her Miss Voss out of habit, tried to guide her to a chair, but she would not sit until someone took the plate from her. She kept looking down at it, as though the food itself had become evidence. She said Elara had promised to stop by Lydia's apartment after the Lantern House rehearsal the night before. Elara always came by on Sundays. She always texted if she was late. She had not answered her phone since 8:41 p.m. At first, there was no panic in the room. Missing adults often turned out not to be missing. They went to a friend's sofa, took a long drive, turned their phone off during an argument, disappeared for one night because one night was the only power they still had. But Lydia made Elara sound unlike that kind of person. Elara Voss was 31, a records technician at the county archive, steady almost to the point of severity. She labeled leftover containers with dates. She kept spare batteries in every drawer. She had a habit of calling Lydia before she crossed the reservoir causeway after dark because Lydia worried about the fog. She did not leave meals uneaten. She did not ignore her aunt. Detective Celine Ward came down from the second floor before 9. She had slept badly, had a coffee stain on the cuff of her shirt, and had spent the early morning looking at burglary reports. She expected to meet a frightened relative and take a careful preliminary statement. Instead, she met Lydia, who had already written down the names of 3 people Elara had seen the day before, the make and model of Elara's car, the prescription number for her migraine medication, the location of her spare key, and the last 5 outgoing calls visible on the shared family plan. Lydia's grief looked organized because Lydia was an organized woman. That was how everyone explained it later. She told Detective Ward that Elara had been at Lantern House, the old municipal theater on Sparrow Street, helping catalog costumes for the Centennial exhibition. The theater had closed to audiences 15 years earlier, but the town still used the rehearsal rooms and lobby for community events. Lydia volunteered there with the handbell group. Elara had taken an interest in the building's basement archives because many county records had been stored there after a courthouse flood in the 70s. That, Lydia said, was where trouble had started. "There was a man," she said, lowering her voice, though no one else was close enough to hear. "Bram Coyle." Ward wrote the name down. Bram had been a contractor before his license was suspended. He fixed roofs in cash, drank at the long table bar, and had a way of showing up wherever official papers had been filed against him. 3 months earlier, Elara had helped the probate office scan a batch of guardianship and inheritance records connected to his late mother's estate. Bram believed those records had cost him an old house on Barrow Lane. He had accused Elara of losing pages, hiding pages, changing pages. He had left 2 messages at the archive's public desk. Lydia had saved them because she saved everything. She played the first message from her phone. Bram's voice filled the interview room, rough and sour. "Tell your little paper girl she should learn what happens when she locks a man out of his own blood." The second message was worse, but less specific. He called Elara by name. He said some records should burn with the building they came from. Lydia dabbed her eyes with a tissue she had folded into quarters. She said Elara had tried to shrug it off. Elara was proud. She did not like being treated as fragile. But on Sunday evening, during the costume inventory, she had stepped into the corridor to answer a call. When she came back, Lydia said she looked pale. She would not say who had called. At 8:30, Elara told Lydia she needed air and walked out through the side vestibule toward the Reservoir Road. Lydia thought she was going to move her car closer because the fog was thickening. She never came back for her bracelet, Lydia said. That was the first time anyone at the station heard about the bracelet. Lydia described it the way a person describes an heirloom after a house fire, carefully and with guilt. It was narrow and bright, made of hammered silver links and 7 porcelain charms glazed in different shades of blue. Elara's mother had worn it before she died. Elara had almost never taken it off, but the clasp had been loose, and Lydia had been meaning to repair it. During the rehearsal, Lydia said, Elara had removed it because it kept snagging on old costume lace. Lydia remembered seeing it on the edge of the makeup counter. When Elara did not return, Lydia assumed she had slipped it into her pocket. Only later, after an officer found nothing on the counter, did Lydia say she might have remembered wrong. Maybe Elara had fastened it again before leaving. Maybe she had taken it with her. There was so much confusion. The night had folded in on itself. By noon, Elara's silver hatchback was found in the commuter lot beside the West bus loop, 2 miles from Lantern House, and half a mile from Bram Coyle's room above the long table. The driver's door was unlocked. Her tote bag sat on the passenger seat with her wallet, county ID, and a stack of scanned index forms inside. Her phone was gone. One windshield wiper was raised, as if someone had meant to leave a notice and change their mind. In the damp gravel behind the rear tire, a patrol officer found the end of a cigarette smoked down to the filter. Bram Coyle smoked that brand. Half of Rookmere knew it because he tucked the packs into the rolled sleeve of his work shirt. By sunset, the case had a shape people could understand. Elara had been threatened by a bitter man over records. She had left the theater upset. Her car had turned up near his room. Her phone was missing. She had vanished in the wet, breathing dark between the bus loop and the reservoir embankment. That night, Lydia stood under the glass awning of Lantern House while volunteers searched the gutters, the alley mouths, the shallow drainage cuts beside Sparrow Street. Rainwater dripped through the rusted letters of the marquee. She wore latex gloves because the officers had told everyone not to disturb anything, and she held a flashlight with both hands. When television crews arrived from the city, she did not push forward, but she answered when they asked who Elara was. She was the person who remembered what everyone else misplaced, Lydia said, her voice breaking only once. Please bring her home. For weeks, Lydia's words became the center of the case. People repeated them at the diner and on the school steps. They printed them on flyers, next to a photograph of Elara taken at the archive holiday luncheon. In the photograph, Elara's hair was pinned on one side with a tortoiseshell clip, and her hand rested against her collarbone, the blue charms of the bracelet visible at her wrist. Bram Coyle was questioned for 9 hours across 2 days. He denied taking Elara. He said he had been drinking in his room, then walking around the reservoir to sober up because the bar owner had cut him off. He admitted leaving the messages. He admitted being angry. He admitted he might have walked past the bus loop after midnight. He could not explain why the cigarette filter behind Elara's car matched the brand in his pocket, except to say that other people smoked and gravel lots collected filth. His room smelled of tobacco, damp boots, and canned soup. Detectives found no blood, no bracelet, no phone. They did find a folded photocopy of an old probate form with Elara's initials in the scanning field, and they found a coil of nylon rope in a toolbox. Bram said it was for tarps. He said everything in a contractor's room looked guilty if you wanted it to. The newspapers did not use that quote. they used the messages instead. Lydia kept searching. No one suspected Lydia because Lydia had made suspicion feel indecent. By the 4th year, Elara's name had become a certain kind of quiet in Rookmere. It appeared on a small brass plaque beside the archive reading room. It came up when fog rolled over the reservoir and parents told daughters not to walk alone. It came up when Lantern House finally received a restoration grant. The town council approved work to stabilize the roof, reopen the lobby, and turn the back rehearsal wing into a community arts space. Lydia attended the meeting in a navy coat, seated in the 2nd row. When the council president said the restored rehearsal room would carry Elara's name, Lydia covered her mouth and nodded. The bracelet returned in a handbell that had no reason to hold a secret. Its discovery began with a sound that was almost not a sound at all. A dullness, a wrongness. The handbell choir had been asked to perform at the groundbreaking ceremony for the theater restoration, and Lydia insisted they use the old Lantern House bells, a mismatched set stored in a locked cabinet since the building's active days. The bells had belonged to children's programs, holiday pageants, benefit concerts, all the ordinary ceremonies by which a town convinces itself it is a family. One bell, an F sharp with a bronze waist and a cracked leather handle, would not ring properly. It made a choked clank, as though its voice had been wrapped in cloth. Lydia told the choir director to leave it. They could play around the missing note. But the choir director, a practical woman named Sella Meyer, took it after rehearsal to a repairman in Marrow Crossing who restored church bells, accordions, and anything with small moving parts. The repairman's name was Ansel Baird. He was 72 and had fingers made blunt by years of work. He opened the bell on a Wednesday afternoon while rain tapped against the tin roof of his workshop. Inside, folded tight around the clapper stem, was a strip of discolored fabric. Inside that fabric was a bracelet. At first, he thought it belonged to a child who had hidden it there as a prank. Then he saw the porcelain charms, blue as broken sky, a crescent, a rain cloud, a little lantern, a flat stamped charm with 2 initials blackened by age. E.V. Ansel did not call Lydia. He did not call the choir director. He called the county sheriff's office and sat beside the bell until a deputy arrived, his hands folded in his lap as if any movement might alter the past. Detective Ward was no longer assigned to major cases. She had transferred to the cold case desk after an injury to her left knee made long field work difficult. She was 3 rooms away from the evidence intake counter when the deputy carried in the bell. She recognized the bracelet before anyone said the name. For a moment, she was back under the Lantern House awning, watching rain drip from Lydia Voss's gloves. The evidence tech photographed the bell from every angle. The bracelet lay on white paper under fluorescent light, dull and warped. 2 links were bent nearly straight. The clasp was torn rather than unclasped. One charm, the bird, had snapped in half. Dark material clung to the underside of the lantern charm, tucked into the seam where porcelain met silver. A thread of greenish wool was caught in the broken hinge. There was also dust, not ordinary house dust, but a fine mineral powder with reddish grit that gathered in the wrapped fabric's folds. Ward felt the case shift inside her, not open, not solve, but move. The first contradiction was simple. Lydia had told police the bracelet was either on the makeup counter or on Elara's wrist when Elara left the theater. The bell had been locked in a cabinet in Lantern House. Inside a rehearsal room, Lydia said she never re-entered after Elara walked out. The second contradiction came from the bell cabinet log. In the months after Elara vanished, the theater had closed completely while roof leaks were assessed. Only 3 people had signed out keys to the rear wing: Felix Danner, the building caretaker, Sella Meyer, the choir director, and Lydia Voss, who had requested access to retrieve music stands and memory candles for the 6-month vigil. Felix had died 2 years earlier. Sella had been in another state when Elara disappeared and had borrowed the key only after the restoration grant. Lydia had signed for the key 7 times in the first year. A bracelet hidden inside a bell did not prove murder. It proved someone had moved the bracelet. But after 4 years of nothing, movement itself was a confession of sorts. Objects do not crawl into bronze and wrap themselves around clappers. Ward and her new partner, Detective Niall Farrow, drove to the repair shop the next morning. Ansel Baird showed them the bench where he had opened the bell. He described the fabric, the way it had been wound, the pressure needed to remove the clapper stem. It was not a quick hiding place. Whoever put the bracelet there had used a screwdriver and patience. Whoever did it knew the bell could sit untouched for years. Could it have been inside since before Elara disappeared? Farrow asked. Ansel shook his head. Not with that wrap. This bell would never have rung right. Anyone using it would have noticed. Forensics moved more slowly than grief ever does. The dark material under the lantern charm tested presumptively for blood, too degraded at first to identify. The mineral powder contained brick dust, lime, and old black paint flakes. The wool fiber was dyed with a shade discontinued more than a decade earlier by a local uniform supplier. The fabric wrapped around the bracelet was a torn strip from a theater costume lining, a stiff gray cotton used in municipal productions from the 80s. Ward ordered the evidence boxes from the original search pulled from storage. She reread Lydia's statements with a pencil. She made a map of Lantern House as it had been the night Elara vanished. Lobby, ticket window, main stair, rehearsal room, costume workroom, side vestibule, alley door, basement stairs, bell cabinet, old reservoir service corridor sealed behind the lower stage wall. The reservoir corridor was a leftover from the building's first life. Before Lantern House became a theater, part of the site had served the water department. Beneath the back wing ran a brick passage used to inspect valves that once regulated overflow from the hill reservoirs. The passage had been closed in 1969 after a child broke his ankle there during a pageant. During the first search, officers had checked the visible basement rooms and the storm drains accessible from outside. The old corridor had been listed on one building plan, crossed out on another, and described by Felix Danner as blocked by masonry. Felix had said many things, Ward now remembered, and most of them had been received through Lydia. Felix had been half-deaf, frightened of police, and protective of the building in the way caretakers become protective of ruins. Lydia had sat beside him in the first interview because he trusted her. She had repeated questions into his good ear. Ward found the recording. For 4 years it had sat in digital storage, clear enough to hear the rain against the interview room window. Ask him about the lower corridor, Ward had said in the recording. Lydia's voice, gentle and close to the microphone, repeated, "She wants to know about the basement storage, Felix. Not lower corridor. Basement storage." Felix answered that the storage rooms had been checked. At the time, it had meant nothing. A tired woman simplifying a question for an old man. Now Ward played the 10 seconds again and again until Farrow told her to stop before the words lost meaning entirely. They obtained a warrant for Lantern House before sunrise Friday. The restoration crew had already torn open parts of the back wing, leaving the rehearsal room exposed to daylight for the first time in years. Dust floated in the beams from temporary lamps. The bell cabinet stood empty against the wall, its shelves labeled in Lydia's careful handwriting. F sharp. GA. Practice mallets. Children's gloves. Behind the stage, masons had removed a section of crumbling plaster and revealed old brick. One area sounded hollow when tapped. A city engineer brought a scope camera. The lens slipped through a gap and showed darkness, then curved brick slick with mineral staining, then the edge of a corroded pipe. The corridor was not open, exactly. It was a cramped passage, half filled with debris, sealed from the theater side by a false wall that had never appeared on the newer plans. The entrance had been hidden behind a rolling rack of costumes on the night Elara vanished. The lock on the rack's wheel had been cut and replaced sometime in the past. The cut was old, but not ancient. They broke through carefully. No one spoke much. Even the workers understood the silence that gathers when a building begins to answer a question. The passage smelled of wet stone and rust. At the far end, beneath a collapsed valve platform, they found Elara. There are discoveries that make noise and discoveries that absorb it. This one took every sound out of the corridor. Ward stood back while the forensic team moved forward. She did not need to see details to know the case had left the world of theories. A belt buckle, a shoe, the tortoiseshell hair clip visible under dust. Not enough for a person, and yet entirely a person. Near the remains, under flakes of old black paint, they found a county archive badge with Elara's name still readable. They found 3 water-stained index cards sealed in a plastic sleeve. They found the missing bird charm from the bracelet. The broken porcelain half matched the piece inside the bell. The medical examiner would later say Elara had suffered a fatal head injury consistent with a fall or blow, and that the condition of the scene suggested she had died the night she vanished, not long after she disappeared from the rehearsal room. The report would avoid speculation. Reports do that. They create borders around horror and call it professionalism. Lydia was at home when they found Elara. She lived in a second-floor apartment above a closed stationery shop, 3 blocks from Lantern House. The windows were full of plants. On the wall beside the kitchen hung framed photographs of Elara from childhood to adulthood. Gap-toothed Elara holding a spelling bee ribbon. Teenage Elara squinting in sun. Elara at her archive desk with a pencil tucked behind her ear. Ward did not arrest Lydia that day. She informed her that remains had been found and watched the news enter Lydia's face. At first, Lydia made no sound. She sat on the edge of a floral chair and gripped the arms. "Where?" she asked. "Lantern House," Ward said. Lydia closed her eyes. A tear moved down the side of her nose. "That poor child," she whispered. "Not my child. Not Elara. That poor child." Ward wrote the phrase in her notebook later, then crossed it out. Words spoken under shock could be anything. Still, it stayed with her. The district attorney announced a renewed investigation and asked for patience. Patience was an ugly word by then. Ward began with the evidence Lydia had helped create. The phone calls from Bram were real, but the timing was useful in a way that now seemed too convenient. The last threatening message had been left 6 days before Elara vanished. Lydia had told reporters about it only after the car was found near Bram's room. Elara's co-workers remembered the messages, but none remembered Elara being frightened enough to leave a rehearsal over Bram. One co-worker, a quiet scanner named Orla Tesh, said Elara had actually been worried about a different batch of records. "Not probate," Orla said. "The theater boxes." Ward and Farrow met her in the archive basement, among shelves that smelled of paper and dust. Orla had avoided giving a statement in the early days because she did not think she knew anything useful, and because Lydia had been kind to her at the vigil. Now, with Elara found, small things seemed less small. The theater boxes were old municipal storage cartons moved from Lantern House after the roof leaks worsened. Elara had been sorting them in the month before she vanished. Most held programs, tax receipts, donor lists, and school pageant forms. But one carton had contained records from a place called Brindle House, a private maternity residence that operated outside Rookmere from the late 60s through the early 90s. The building had been demolished before Elara was born. Its files were never supposed to be in the theater. Elara said they were mixed in by accident, Orla said, but she was upset. "About what?" Ward asked. Orla looked toward the stairwell, as if Lydia might appear with a casserole and a soft reprimand. Names scratched out, the same handwriting replacing them. payment receipts folded into baptism certificates. She said some girls went in under one name and came out under another. Did she mention Lydia? No, Orla said. Then, after a long pause, she asked me how old Mrs. Voss was in 1982. That was the year Lydia turned 22. According to her public biography, she had worked then as a junior clerk for a charitable office that placed young mothers in temporary housing. Later, she became a music teacher, then a fixture of every committee that needed someone patient with forms and children. The Brindlehouse cartons had disappeared from the archive intake list after Elara vanished. At the time, nobody knew they mattered. Lydia had collected Elara's personal files from her apartment and returned several archive boxes she said Elara had brought home by mistake. The theater boxes were not among them. A search warrant for Lydia's apartment found nothing in the obvious places. No hidden ledger, no bloody coat, no confession. Her closets were neat. Her desk drawers were labeled. Her kitchen contained 3 kinds of tea and a jar of lemon drops. Investigators took her old wool coats, her sewing kit, her handbell tools, her address books, her external drives, and 2 boxes of papers from under the bed. Lydia watched politely and asked if Detective Ward wanted the plant moved so the officers could reach the outlet behind the cabinet. Farrow said later that guilty people are rarely that calm. Ward said calm was not the same as innocent. The first real break from the apartment was microscopic. A green wool fiber caught in the bracelet hinge matched the lining of a coat Lydia had donated to the church rummage sale 3 months after Elara disappeared. The coat itself had been sold, but the donation intake card remained because Lydia had filled it out with her usual precision. One forest green wool walking coat, frayed cuff, missing inner button. The coat was found in a thrift warehouse 2 counties away, still tagged, because moth damage had kept it from the sales floor. The lining fiber was consistent, not unique, but consistent. A retired midwife named Verity Mao, living in a room that overlooked a supermarket roof, remembered more than she wanted to. Lydia wasn't the worst one there, Verity said. That's how people like her survive in memory. They stand beside worse people. Did Elara Voss ever contact you? Ward asked. Verity looked at the window. A woman called. She didn't say her name at first. Asked about a girl named Iona Whitrow. That name did not appear in Elara's known family history. It did appear on a torn Brindlehouse receipt, found in a carton, misfiled with theater programs after a second archive search. Beside the name, in faded pencil, were the words, "Infant transferred," and the initials, LV, Lydia Voss. Elara had found the receipt 4 days before she vanished. Her browsing history showed searches for Iona Whitrow, Brindlehouse, closed maternity residence, and how to report falsified birth record. Her desk calendar had one note written on the Sunday of the Lantern House rehearsal. Ask L before filing. Ask L, there are moments in an investigation when the cruelty is not in what is hidden, but in what the victim tried to do first. Elara had not gone straight to police. She had not exposed Lydia publicly. She had gone to ask the woman who raised her. What Elara had discovered was not only institutional, it was intimate. Iona Whitrow had been 17 when she entered Brindlehouse. She gave birth to a daughter in February 1992. One file said the baby died of respiratory failure after 2 days. Another file, recovered from a water-damaged roll of microfilm, listed a private placement to a family outside the county. The infant's identifying bracelet number matched a handwritten note in Lydia's old receipt book. The baby had not died. She had been renamed Elara Voss after Lydia arranged for her own older sister, Marion Voss, to adopt the child quietly. Marion, the woman Elara believed was her mother, had loved her. That part was not a lie, but the adoption had begun in fraud, through a frightened teenager told her baby was gone. Lydia had been the bridge between the theft and the family that benefited from it. Marion died when Elara was 11. Lydia took over guardianship. She became the keeper of Elara's story because she had helped write the false one. Lydia agreed to a second formal interview after her attorney advised against it. That was Lydia's way. She wanted to appear helpful. She arrived wearing a lavender cardigan, her hands bare except for a thin gold watch. Ward placed the photograph of the bracelet on the table between them. Lydia looked at it for a long time. Her face tightened with something that might have been pain or calculation. "I knew it would come back," she said softly. Pharaoh shifted in his chair. Ward did not. "What do you mean?" Ward asked. "I mean grief comes back. Objects come back. Everything does, eventually." "Did you put Elara's bracelet inside the bell?" "No." "Did you know it was there?" "No." "Did you enter the bell cabinet after Elara disappeared?" "Yes. I told you that, for the vigils." "Did you open the F-sharp bell?" "I don't remember." "That's different from no." Lydia folded her hands. "Detective, I was not myself. I had lost my niece." Ward slid another photograph across the table. The half-bird charm found near Elara's remains. Lydia touched the edge of the paper, not the image. "We found this with her," Ward said. "The other half was inside the bell with the bracelet." Lydia's mouth trembled once. She loved that bird. "Why did the bracelet break in the service corridor?" "I don't know." "Why was Elara in the service corridor at all?" "I don't know." "Why did you translate my question to Felix Danner as basement storage when I asked about the lower corridor?" For the first time, Lydia looked directly at her. "He was confused," Lydia said. "No. He answered the question you gave him. He was an old man. He knew that building. You knew that building. Elara had found Brindlehouse records in that building. She wrote Ask Elle on her calendar for the day she vanished." Lydia's eyes watered, but she did not wipe them. "She asked me many things. She always had." "Did she ask if Iona Whitrow's baby died?" The room changed, not visibly. The clock still clicked. The recorder still glowed red. Pharaoh's pen still rested against the page, but Lydia seemed to withdraw from her own skin, leaving behind an old woman in a lavender cardigan and taking some inner witness into a locked room. "Iona was unstable," she said. It was the first time she acknowledged the name. Ward let the silence widen. "She had no family who wanted her," Lydia continued. "She was a child with a child. Marion could give that baby a home. So you falsified the death. I was 22. And afterward? Afterward, I did what I could. I made sure Elara was safe. Marion loved her. I loved her. Do you think a paper would have loved her better?" Ward kept her voice even. "Elara had the right to know she was not born from a blank space. She was not blank to me. Did she threaten to report you?" Lydia's expression hardened in a way that made her suddenly younger. She threatened to destroy every life that had grown around one mistake. "One?" You sit there with files and photographs, as if life can be rebuilt by numbering wrongs. You have no idea what Brindlehouse was. You have no idea what those girls signed, what they begged for, what families paid, what families promised. I did not invent that place. But you kept its secrets. I kept Elara." The words hung there, naked and terrible. Lydia did not confess that day. She recovered herself, asked for water, then said she was tired. Her attorney ended the interview, but the mask had moved, not fallen. Moved enough to show what was beneath. To charge Lydia, they needed more than motive and a bracelet and a bell. They needed the night. They rebuilt it from the building because the living had lied or forgotten. The side vestibule door Lydia said Elara used had a warped lower hinge. In wet weather, it scraped loudly against the threshold unless lifted with both hands. During a reenactment, the sound carried into the rehearsal room. 3 volunteers who had been present that night when played a recording of the scrape said they didn't remember hearing it. They did remember the rain. They remembered Lydia dropping a box of costume gloves. They remembered Elara and Lydia speaking in the workroom with the door partly closed. One volunteer, a retired teacher named Callan Spry, had not given a full statement in the original investigation because she left early with a migraine. She now remembered something she had dismissed as embarrassment. Around 8:40, she had gone back inside for her umbrella. From the alley, she saw Lydia at the side vestibule, not Elara. Lydia was wiping the door handle with a white cloth. "I thought she was cleaning," Callan said. "She was always cleaning." Lydia's car had no GPS. Her old phone's location data was too coarse to place her in one building. But the restoration crew found something no one had known to seek: a storage room light switch linked to a municipal energy monitor installed during an efficiency trial 5 years earlier. The trial was abandoned, but the logs survived on a city server. On the night Elara vanished, the basement circuit behind the costume workroom drew power from 8:47 to 9:26 p.m. The rehearsal had ended at 8:30. Volunteers had left by 8:42. Lydia had claimed she was outside searching. The corridor itself gave practical answers. Dust patterns on the valve platform showed an area of old disturbance beneath newer mineral crust. A torn scrap of gray lining caught on a protruding nail matched the fabric wrapped around the bracelet. Rust marks indicated a metal cart had been dragged toward the wall. In a storage alcove, investigators found one wheel from a rolling costume rack, cut through at the stem and replaced with a similar but newer wheel. The cut marks were consistent with a compact hacksaw found in Lydia's apartment, wrapped in newspaper behind a row of plant pots on the fire escape. The hacksaw did not have blood on it. It did not need to. It placed Lydia in the mechanics of hiding, not the violence itself. The violence was reconstructed from absence. There was no sign of a planned weapon, no evidence Lydia arrived intending to kill. Ward believed, and later argued to the district attorney, that Elara confronted Lydia in the costume workroom after the other volunteers left. The bracelet snagged or was grabbed. It broke. Lydia tried to stop Elara from leaving with the Brindlehouse cards. In the struggle, Elara fell against the edge of an iron pattern press or was struck by it. The old press was found in the workroom during the restoration, its painted edge chipped, cleaned long ago but still holding trace material in a seam. The sample was too degraded for a full profile, but the blood type was consistent with Elara's. After that, panic became method. Lydia knew the lower corridor existed because she had played in Lantern House as a girl and later volunteered there when the old staff still used the passage for storage. She dragged or carried Elara through the service opening, took the archive badge and cards, dropped at least one charm, and sealed the area behind the costume rack. She hid the bracelet because it had broken in the room and could not be explained. She drove Elara's car to the West Bus Loop, left it near Bram's room, raised the wiper to suggest interruption, discarded Elara's phone somewhere it would never be found, and returned with the kind of breathless grief no one challenges at midnight. Then she came to the police station with a cold dinner plate. The plate mattered only emotionally, which made it matter more. It created a picture. Aunt waiting, aunt worried, aunt feeding, aunt bereft. It was not evidence of innocence. It was a prop carried by someone who understood that people believe care when they can see it wrapped in foil. The district attorney charged Lydia Voss with second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, abuse of a corpse, and obstruction. The arrest took place on a bright morning in May, almost 4 years and 8 months after Elara vanished. Lydia did not struggle. She asked if she could turn off the kettle. She asked Detective Ward whether the plants on the windowsill would be watered. When the cuffs closed around her wrists, she looked not frightened, but offended, as though the world had finally broken a rule of politeness. Ward testified for 2 days. She described the original statement, the bracelet, the bell, The corridor. The mistranslated question to Felix Danner. The defense tried to make each piece small. The bracelet could have been hidden by Felix. The corridor could have been used by Bram. The fiber could have transferred innocently. The Brindle House records proved embarrassment, not murder. Lydia's inconsistencies were grief. Her key access was volunteer work. Her calm was character. Then Ansel Baird took the stand with the F-sharp bell, placed on a padded table before him. The courtroom leaned toward it despite itself. He explained how the clapper assembly worked, how the handle had to be removed, how the fabric had been wound to keep the bracelet from rattling. He said the bell could not have been played normally with the bracelet inside. The prosecutor asked him to ring it as it had sounded when he received it. The judge allowed it. Ansel lifted the bell and moved his wrist. The sound that came out was dull, trapped, almost ashamed. Not a note. A failure of a note. Several jurors looked at Lydia. She looked at the bell. Then the prosecutor asked Ansel to ring a matching bell in working condition. This time the sound opened clear and bright in the courtroom, and the difference between the two told the story better than a chart. Someone had taken an object meant to make a public sound and turned it into a hiding place. Someone had silenced it from within. The most difficult testimony came from Iona Whitrow. Ward had found her living under another name in the northern part of the state. Married, widowed, with 2 adult sons who knew almost nothing about Rookmere. She had spent decades believing her first child died at Brindle House. When investigators told her Elara had lived, then vanished, then been found, grief did not arrive as one emotion. It came as a crowd. Joy with nowhere to go. Rage too late to spend. Motherhood granted and revoked in the same conversation. On the stand, Iona did not look at Lydia. She looked at the jury. "I would not have taken her from Marion if she was loved," she said. "I need that understood. I would have wanted to know her. That is not the same as taking her. Lydia decided I should have a grave instead of a daughter." The defense objected. The judge instructed the jury to consider only the facts relevant to motive, but the sentence remained in the room. Lydia decided I should have a grave instead of a daughter. The jury deliberated for 11 hours. During that time, rain moved over the courthouse roof, the soft, steady rain that had marked so much of the case that people began to speak of it as if weather had memory. Ward sat in the hallway with Farrow and said almost nothing. Across from them, Bram Coyle sat alone. He had come for the verdict because he wanted to hear someone else's name spoken. Lydia was found guilty of manslaughter rather than second-degree murder, guilty of tampering, guilty of obstruction. The lesser conviction hurt some people. It angered others. Ward had expected it. The jury believed in the confrontation, the death, the hiding, the lie. They did not believe beyond a reasonable doubt that Lydia had intended to kill before the moment broke open. Law has its own narrow corridors. At sentencing, Lydia finally spoke without the softness that had carried her through 4 years. "I loved Elara," she said. "Whatever else is said here, I loved her." Iona Whitrow stood from the second row. She did not shout. She only said, "Love doesn't need a wall." The judge ordered Lydia to prison. Given her age, the sentence meant she would likely die there. She remained composed until deputies led her past the evidence table where the bracelet lay in a clear box. Then she stopped walking. For the first time since her arrest, she looked like a woman seeing not an accusation, but a child's wrist. The deputy touched her elbow. Lydia moved on. Lantern House reopened the following spring, without Lydia's music and without the old bell cabinet. The rehearsal wing became a records room and youth studio, but the town voted against naming it for Elara until Iona was asked. Iona requested something simpler, a small plaque near the service corridor, now sealed with glass and light, read, "Elara Voss, who looked for the truth where others stored silence." The bracelet was not displayed. Ward thought people would ask for it because people often want objects to carry what they cannot. But Iona asked for it after the trial, and the court released it when appeals ended. It could not be worn. The links were bent, the clasp ruined, one charm forever split. Iona kept it in a shallow wooden box lined with blue cloth. She visited Rookmere twice a year at first, then once, then only when she could bear the reservoir fog. Ward kept a photograph of the F-sharp bell in the case file, not because it was the most important evidence, but because it reminded her of the exact shape of the lie. Lydia had not hidden Elara in darkness only. She had hidden her inside rituals of love, vigils, meals, music, careful handwriting, public grief. She had trusted the town to confuse devotion with innocence. For a while after the trial, people in Rookmere spoke differently about the night Elara vanished. They stopped saying she left the theater. They said she was kept there. They stopped saying Bram's name with certainty. They said Lydia's with discomfort, as though it tasted unfamiliar. At the restored theater, the handbell choir eventually played again, but they retired the old F-sharp. No one wanted its repaired voice in a holiday song. On the anniversary of Elara's disappearance, Detective Ward walked alone to the west bus loop where the car had been found. The commuter lot had been resurfaced. The long table had become a laundromat. The gravel patch where Bram smoked was gone under clean white lines. She stood there long enough for the streetlights to come on and thought about the raised windshield wiper, the small theatrical gesture of interruption. A person could build an entire false road from gestures like that. A plate of dinner, a missing bracelet, a worried aunt saying the right name at the right time. Then she drove to Lantern House. The marquee had been repaired, but the town had chosen not to make it too bright. Its bulbs glowed warm through the mist. Inside, students were rehearsing a radio play in the lobby, reading lines into microphones while their parents unfolded chairs. The building smelled of paint, raincoats, and paper cups of cocoa. Life had returned, not because the past was gone, but because it had finally been placed where people could see it. Ward stood near the glass-covered section of old brick. Behind it, the sealed corridor was lit by a narrow strip of light. Nothing moved there. Nothing needed to. A girl of about 12 stepped close to read Elara's plaque. She wore a charm bracelet on her wrist, plastic stars and tiny keys clicking softly when she moved. Her mother told her not to touch the glass. The girl folded her hands behind her back and leaned in anyway. "What does it mean?" she asked. Her mother read the line aloud, "Who looked for the truth where others stored silence." The girl considered that, then nodded as if it made sense to her in some private way children have of accepting what adults complicate. Ward left before the rehearsal began. Outside, the reservoir fog had thinned. Across Sparrow Street, the bakery windows shone. Somewhere inside the theater, a clear bell rang. Not the old F-sharp, another bell. One with nothing hidden inside it. The note traveled through the lobby doors and out beneath the marquee, bright and brief. And for once, Rookmere let it fade without turning it into anything else.